Here is a Warhammer miniature. Here's another Warhammer miniature. One of these costs $50. The other cost $0. You see, this week, Warhammer 40k got leaked onto the internet, and there was a window there for about 2 hours where you could download all of Warhammer. And I'm not talking about downloading the rulebook or Warhammer art or a cartoon from Warhammer Plus TV. I'm talking about Warhammer. The models, the miniatures, from Orc Docks to Space Marine Thunderhawks to entire armies, because the actual 3D files of all these miniatures were available to download online for free. And Games Workshop were not happy, because these 3D files can be used to 3D print Warhammer miniatures at home with a 3D printer. So if you happen to have spotted this leak in time and downloaded these files, you now have free Warhammer for life. You could be printing an entire army tomorrow, and not with the imaginary bad bootleg quality like it came from a poor rip of a rerun on TNT 30 years ago sold by one of those fellas that steal cars in FBI DVD commercials. No, these are models printed at high quality and fidelity, so much so that if you slap on a little bit of paint onto them, like you should, then it will be almost impossible to tell the difference between the models that you paid $50 for at the Warhammer store and the miniatures that you got for $0 from a guy with a Harambe avatar online. And this was a huge drop of Warhammer 40k 3D print files, which Games Workshop are kind of reeling from, because while the window of time that these files could be downloaded was short, that didn't stop people from downloading them. In fact, in just those 2 hours that these were available, there were over 200,000 downloads of this illicit digitized Warhammer catalog. That's potentially 200,000 people now with all the Warhammer files in their hands, who not only have the files to print at home for their own edification, but who can then upload the files again into the wild, starting this whole thing over again. As the saying goes, the juice is loose. So let's get into what happened and what's next, because for Games Workshop, this wasn't the end of the story. This is all just the beginning, and they're gonna have to make some changes around here, because for them, things are about to get a whole lot worse. Like almost as bad as being trapped on an island filled with terrifying beasts, cyclopean monstrosities, lurking horrors, and nightmarish scorpions that genuinely, while frightening, look really cool, if a little bit too realistic for me. But all that can be fun with the brand new game coming out of Firelock Games called Brigands of Ar. This is a brand new warband skirmish sized game set in a fantastical sword and sorcery Conan-esque setting where players must battle enemy warbands, monsters, and even the elements themselves in ancient ruins of civilizations past. The game can be played head-to-head, co-op, solo, or even with multiple players. You'll control 3 to 6 characters, but the most important one will be your leader, who you can customize to be either a brutal warlord, a cunning tactician, a radical zealot, or a powerful sorcerer. Every player's warband is unique, and all their traits and equipment are fully customizable. Games take less than an hour to play, and it is fully possible to play a full campaign in a single evening. And you're going to want to do so, because there is cursed treasure to find and much glory to be won in this fast-paced tactical game where the outcome of battle is never certain. I'm so excited for this game. It's coming from Firelock Games, who have a fantastic war game pedigree. In fact, they make one of my favorite war games, Blood and Plunder, and now they're getting into fantasy, which I've been begging for forever. It looks like so much fun, so do check it out at my link below to sign up to be notified when the game launches on Kickstarter very soon, and you'll be able to prove whether your band of brigands are worthy to feast in the Hall of Kings, or if they are simply destined to a similar fate to those who once ruled. What a vibe. And thanks to Firelock Games for sponsoring today's video. Okay, so yeah, a ton of Warhammer was leaked onto the internet. Now, I'm not gonna tell you the names of anyone involved in this, because I grew up in Northern Ireland, and I learned the value of keeping your mouth shut, especially if you're caught going to the bathroom in an alley on your way home from a club, and then you're arrested for public indecency, but told that if you'll inform on fellow Catholics, they'll drop the charges, but you refuse to do so, and then suddenly you're on an offenders register and you lose your job, your home, your kids, everything, and all you have is ruined, so you decide, screw it and just make videos about little toy figurines on the YouTube. Just spitballing there. Could happen to anybody. More common than you think. Anyway, it is fair to say, however, that this is one of the biggest dumps of Warhammer 3D print files on the internet in recent memory. The files were uploaded to a very popular 3D print file hosting website, very popular, and almost immediately the news spread about it amongst the 3D printing community. Now, as far as I'm aware, no one really knew that this was going to happen. There wasn't a phone-in ahead of time, but it was almost immediately obvious and clear if you were hanging out in 3D print communities that this was going down when it went down. And, you know, I do. That's where I hang out. And I'm not confirming or denying whether I saw this in time and downloaded dozens and dozens and dozens of potential Games Workshop trademarked miniatures illicitly. Though do subscribe to the channel below for my new Thunderhawk painting series that will be coming to the channel soon. It's going to be very exciting and, in theory, very expensive. Now, these files were all uploaded to the internet by a person who had this profile picture, who, after finishing their apparent goal to upload their entire library of Warhammer 3D print files onto the internet, changed their profile picture to this. Mission accomplished, son. Of course, the uploader was then promptly banned by the very popular 3D print site that they had uploaded everything onto, and all their materials were taken down. So if you do go to the links now, they're all broken, they'll go to nowhere, which makes sense, you know, because these materials that were uploaded were obviously and very explicitly digital files of Warhammer 40k miniatures. There was no pretending here. They were not trying to get away with it. They did not name them the Grimdark Space Super Soldier. They were called things like Primaris Space Marine with Melta-Cannon. Everybody knew what was going on. So the website did take them down without Games Workshop, as far as I'm aware, even needing to do anything or send a cease and desist. However, the files had been up for a couple of hours before they were spotted and taken down, and by then the damage had been done. Yes, it had been clamped down on pretty quickly, but really, this is just the beginning of an even bigger problem for Games Workshop, one that is going to get even worse for them in future, because we're going to see this happen a lot more. So, you know, subscribe to the channel, hear about that, as well as see my new army build series where I'm painting one of every single Warhammer miniature. Again, a potentially, in theory, very expensive video series. But how do I know that this is going to be a major problem for Games Workshop? Well, it's because the files that were uploaded were not sculpted by a person crudely replicating the aesthetics of Games Workshop miniatures in 3D printing sculpting software, or even taking official miniatures and creating a recast of them to produce low quality duplicates. No, these models were scanned straight onto the internet from the official models, like you'd scan a document or rulebook to be passed around online, like the attractive cousin in a very isolated family. Now, it must be said that many of these files did not originate with the uploader. This was more of a curated list of files, many of them that already existed on the internet and had simply been collected. So this was really a collection collated that had then been released. But what surprised me most about all this was the quality of the 3D prints that could have been printed from these, in theory, because these files have resulted in 3D printed versions of Warhammer miniatures that are almost indistinguishable from the real thing. They look perfect, and that should really worry Games Workshop, because while the ability to 3D scan miniatures like this has been around for a while, and I've even tried it out myself in the past, there's been phone apps and tech to scan pictures of 3D miniatures that you own on the computer for years that you could then print later on, and I've seen them before, I've used them before, and they used to be very primitive, and they generated poor results with 3D models that resulted in 3D prints that held a real lack of detail and clarity. However, it seems like in the last few years, this tech has come on really far, and you can see it visibly in this recent batch of uploaded Warhammer 3D files, which are pretty much perfect. And these are now in the online ecosystem. You can find them again right now, and now hundreds of thousands of more people have these files, and there's more likely more files to be on the way because anybody can do this, and it's getting easier and easier. The technology is now here. This is getting out of hand, and I'm sure it's the sort of thing that keeps Games Workshop executives up at night. Well, that and all the cocaine. And it explains in part Games Workshop's insane clampdown on third-party creators, because Games Workshop hate the idea of Warhammer being free and accessible and not a premium product as they would have us believe. No, these can be gotten for really cheap. But this isn't a war that Games Workshop will be able to win with legal threats, because they might not know it, but Games Workshop are actually facing a battle here that has already previously claimed the scalps of dozens of billion-dollar, like massive corporations already, and warped entire industries in the past, forcing them to change on a fundamental level. Because really, this phenomena that Games Workshop are up against of Warhammer miniatures being uploaded online for others to download for free is, when you think about it, really just online piracy. And sure, okay, online piracy, it usually relates to digital-only content like movies, music, and video games. But really, that's what these miniatures are. They're 3D STL print files that can be spread digitally. Because, okay, there are some bootleg Warhammer that can be bought from smaller sellers who will print and post 3D printed Warhammer to buyers. Those guys are very small in number thanks to the fact that sites like Etsy and eBay, they ban accounts and shut down sellers who do that the second the Games Workshop issue a cease and desist. And so it's hard to sell 3D print models of Warhammer, at least ones that are so explicitly based on actual Warhammer models online. And you can't sell them anonymously, which really, puts a crimp in that. No, most bootleg Warhammer is really just identical to online piracy because they're digital files, they're files that get spread around anonymously online, torrented, hosted on file sharing websites, sometimes for money, sometimes not, like in this instance, because everything was free here. And people can download them and then spread them around themselves, like a Father Christmas-shaped virus. But okay, I hear the disagreement coming from the comment section already. Pirating music and videos, and to a lesser extent video games, is very easy to do. You just download a torrent, and that's it, you're done. You just double click the thing and you can watch or play or listen to whatever it is. But downloading a 3D STL print file of a Space Marine only gets you so far. You then have to actually, 3D print the physical model. And that's an entire hobby in and of itself, right? I mean, it's a lot of time and effort to learn and do. Wrong, incorrect, that's not the case anymore. It's over, that's over, that argument is done. Because today you can go out and say buy a Bamboo Lab 3D printer, preferably from my affiliate link below, help support the channel, and then you can come back to me because you'll find that actually it's supremely easy these days to 3D print models. You just plug in the printer, let it calibrate itself, which it does automatically, then you download the file that you want to print, and within a few clicks it'll print, and it will look good. It's insane. I've talked about it previously on the channel. 3D printing has really gotten out of hand. It's kind of wild what you can do now. And right now, yes, Bamboo Lab only do FDM prints, which often come with some layer lines, and they don't look quite as good in general for smaller miniatures, though they do look perfect for terrain and tanks. But FDM printing actually looks way better than you think. In fact, I've played entire games exclusively with FDM printed miniatures, and they can look awesome. Plus, as a bonus, FDM printing is way less toxic than traditional resin printing and also requires like almost zero effort in comparison. And if you've ever been to one of my famous Hawaii Aloha parties, you know that I do not do anything with effort. 3D printing is getting easier, and the second that a non-toxic, easy-to-use resin printer comes out, or FDM prints get just a little bit better looking, it's over. This 3D printing craze will get really crazy, and it will come very mainstream in the miniature wargaming hobby. And remember, the Warhammer business model is kind of special. It's not like video games, or music, or TV, or movies, or whatever. Warhammer is not built on a huge, massive collection of people who buy content. No, it's built built on a small niche community of big buyers who spend a lot of money on models. So it just takes a few of those guys to decide that they do not want to pay quite so much for their miniatures. You know, maybe $50 for a Primaris Lieutenant is a bit much. And hey, you know, if it's easy enough, you can just download these files and get them for free. Well, that's big trouble for Games Workshop. That's their core audience could just move on to another way of getting their Warhammer. The monopoly is over. So, right? Like, what can Games Workshop do about this? Well, except jump on this with lawyers like they're playing legal whack-a-mole, which is something that I think is very tempting for a corporation like Games Workshop, but we saw how well that worked for the music and movie industry, and well, spoiler, but last night I watched for free the forgotten 1986 Mark Harmon movie, A Deliberate Stranger, a movie remarkable for being all about mass serial killer Ted Bundy, and yet showing zero actual murders on screen. And I did so without paying a single movie studio, which is good because I would have been very annoyed if I had paid money for that thing. 7 out of 10. But there is a solution to piracy, and it is to simply compete with the pirates. Games Workshop should take this brave new 3D printing world as a challenge, because they can beat piracy. I really believe they can. And the first step to do so would be to reduce the price of Warhammer, because outside of some enthusiasts, most people don't want to 3D print their models. They would prefer to buy plastic miniatures and build them. But the cost of Warhammer puts a lot of people off, and it has really cultivated this huge community of 3D print enthusiasts. And actually, the price of Warhammer does force a lot of people to resort to 3D printing because they just cannot afford the price of Warhammer. And in these economic conditions, which could be roughly described as asphyxiation, that's an increasingly growing number of people, just like the prices of Warhammer keep growing. In fact, if you live in Australia right now, it might actually be your moral duty to pirate Warhammer. So reducing prices across the board by Games Workshop would be a good start, and we know they can do that. We know they can. Their margins are insane. Everybody knows this is the case. So, you know, calm down, Games Workshop, bring down the prices. But also, they could just start selling the digital files themselves. I mean, the digital files are out there. They should just embrace the future and get ahead of the curve. Do a Spotify. That's how the music industry beat piracy. No one pirates music anymore because music is available at an affordable and often free price online. And Games Workshop could do this tomorrow if they wanted, and eventually they will have to do it anyway, so they may as well just get on it early and kind of nip this whole thing in the bud. But also, the miniature wargaming industry, which Games Workshop is a part of, has an advantage against piracy that the movies and music industry did not have, and that's that the miniature wargaming hobby is ultimately a creative hobby that people want to engage in. We don't just consume miniatures and are over it. We build miniatures, we paint them when we have an upcoming game that forces us to, at least. And when that happens, we create art. And Games Workshop can deliver a creative experience that 3D prints would struggle to replicate. Games Workshop could focus their efforts on making Warhammer miniatures fun to build. They could emphasize posability of miniatures, provide tons of options on plastic sprues, let people tell stories with their miniature builds. Games Workshop can compete with 3D printing because hard plastic is simply more fun and superior to build with and kit bash with than resin, or even FDM. And hard plastic is easier to play with, to build weird things around, and to kit bash stuff in. I mean, it should be a joy to build miniatures, but Games Workshop, they've been heading in the wrong direction in recent memory, as they have focused more and more on single pose models that often, I think, could genuinely just be cast in resin. Like, I don't know why half these new miniatures are coming out in hard plastic when they have a single pose and they're not even customizable. So I hope that this massive release of free Warhammer files that have all been spread out across the internet forces Games Workshop to think twice about their relationship with the community and start ruminating on some long-term changes that they need to make, because this is huge, this is massive, everything is changing in our wargame hobby, and it's going to be changing at an increasingly fast pace. This is a quick train that's going on here. Games Workshop need to get on board, and I'll I'll be here covering it all as it happens, so subscribe to the channel, and of course that means you will not miss my new series of videos where I paint the entire Warhammer miniature library, every single miniature from the Games Workshop store. It's all gonna be here. Do not ask me how I got my hands on these thousands of miniatures, including 30 different Thunderhawks, just one after another, like I got them all for free, which I didn't, obviously. I pay Games Workshop hundreds of thousands of dollars for each single one of these. And if you appreciate the advocacy of miniature wargame consumers and checking out the news, then please check out my Patreon to help support my coverage here, because YouTube is pretty rough right now. And massive thanks to my patrons who keep this all going, especially CryptoKev, and I'll catch you all next time. Bye-bye.